get started with Chapter 5, Communication Disorders in a Multicultural World. So the objectives for the chapter: what are multiculturalism and cultural competence? What linguistic and cultural characteristics indicate communication differences rather than communication disorders? How should culturally and linguistically diverse children with communication disorders be assessed and treated? And we're actually going to wait on that third one to get into the assessment chapter, which will be chapter 6, which we'll do next. So let's talk about what are multiculturalism and cultural competence. All right, so multiculturalism is a society in which people from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds, socioeconomic, age, geography, and other variables come together to create a mosaic composed of individuals that form a rich whole. So a society in which each person is valued for their contribution to the whole. So in the past, people would talk about a melting pot where everybody from different cultures kind of came together and blended in, and everybody would then have to be American. And there was like this belief that we all had to be a certain way. But I think people are talking more now about being a salad bowl, mosaic, or tapestry. So if we look at the salad bowl idea, right, if you're Chinese American, Irish American, Italian American, Mexican American, Russian American, Hispanic American, right, coming together, and we're all Americans, but we all each still hold our sort of own culture as well. So we've got maybe a historic culture as well as American culture together, so that we're not just blended in and we're all exactly the same, that we've all got sort of unique and important differences and are working together as Americans. Cultural competence: the ability of service providers to recognize, honor, and respect the beliefs, interaction styles, and behaviors of the individuals and families they serve. And this is so important because you're going to come across a lot of people who have very different beliefs, interaction styles, and behaviors than you. So, how good are you at recognizing that, honoring, and respecting that when working with these clients? And just remembering that culture really shapes our values, beliefs, and experiences. So your culture shapes what you believe is important, just like other people's culture shapes what they believe is important in their life too. So how do we become culturally competent? Number one, learning about the cultural backgrounds of clients and families. So, especially if we have clients and families of a certain culture, if you have a lot of Hispanic American clients, African American clients, white American clients, what does that mean for them? What does that mean for their interaction with you? I always like to talk about the idea that each family also has a culture, so that one family from one culture may have kind of a little bit of a different take on that culture than another family from what you expect to be that same culture. So you can work with two different Hispanic American families, and each family may have a very different take on lots of different things. So we've got to remember that, all right, we might have an idea about what families might value and place importance on based on their culture, but each family is going to be really different in how they do that. Be aware of and work on eliminating our own biases and preconceptions. And you actually can't really ever eliminate your own biases and preconceptions. Everybody has a certain bias, no matter how hard we work at it, but I think we can reduce it a lot to really value and place importance on that people are going to have different ideas and different values, and that's important. And it's important that we're aware of that, and that we can then build on the strengths and values and experience of our clients and families. And if we don't know what's important to our clients, we can't really build on those strengths. So super important. It's important because we've got really a lot of increased diversity in languages spoken. So over 57 million people in America don't use English as the primary language at home, right? So if we only know English, we're definitely at a disadvantage here. So um, being aware of that, and often, the language you speak, the dialect you speak is going to tell a lot about, your culture and things like that. So if you have a different language, a different dialect, your culture and what you value is going to be important too. So language spoken are shifting from more European languages to Spanish and Asian languages as more and more people enter the country from um, Hispanic speaking areas or from Spanish speaking areas, from Asian countries, and bring their own languages, their own culture with them. Um, we just have to be aware of that and start to learn more and more. 50%, there will be a 50% increase, or there was a 50% increase in English language learners in schools from 1997 to 2008. So we're getting more of these kids in school, which is definitely a good thing. And so, how proficient are we in knowing how to access um, all the resources that these kids are going to need? And how do we do that? So more about why these concepts are important. We've got increasing diversity in ethnicity. We've got 31 million foreign-born residents in 2000. That's going to be 48 million foreign-born American residents in 2025. The Hispanic population is expected to triple in the 50 years between 2000 and 2050. And then we also have, for years, the baby boomers were really the largest population group in the US, and they're getting older and older, and I think they're no longer the largest population group. But as they live longer and longer, we're also going to have a much larger percentage of our clients are going to be in nursing homes, in hospitals. So we're going to be working with a lot of older Americans, as well as working with Americans from a real diverse ethnic, racial, religious background. So what linguistic and cultural characteristics indicate communication differences rather than communication disorders? We need to be really familiar with fundamental cultural and linguistic characteristics to avoid false positives, right? So a false positive would be, if someone takes an assessment or a screening and they come up as, oh, this person has a language disorder, has a speech disorder, but really they just have a communication difference, right? That's going to be a false positive. We're going to falsely place them in therapy or in special education when they don't have to be. So moving from an idea of ethnocentrism to cultural relativism. So ethnocentrism is view that members of one's own culture do things the right way, to cultural relativism that other people's ways of doing things are different yet equally valid, right? That we can place importance on some things and others can on other things as well, and that different ways of doing things can be just as equal, just as valid. Um, and the difference, and this is important too, between a stereotype and a tendency. So a stereotype is really a fixed, oversimplified image of members of a community, whereas a cultural tendency is going to be patterns of behavior and values that are commonly observed among members of a culture, but certainly not everybody. And we talked about for a second about how, each family is going to have their own culture. And so you definitely might not see the same thing from family to family. So having an idea about cultural tendencies, but then waiting and seeing, who fits into which idea. So this is a little video you can watch on YouTube. So um, click on the PowerPoint when I'm done, And check this out, communication difference versus disorder. All right, we're going to go through a few populations here and talk about just some sort of overall key cultural values for different groups. We're going to start out with African American cultural and linguistic variables. There's going to be a really central place for religion and strong and extended family ties, a great respect for elders, an emphasis on importance of education. And I'll talk when I talk about Hispanic Americans who also have that, I'll talk about how that can be helpful as a speech language pathologist, but also, that can be hard as well. And remember that 61% of African American children live in poverty, while only 27% of white children do. So that's going to place African Americans at greater risk of poor health, getting poor education, and having overall poor social outcomes. And as a result, African Americans might tend to be more present oriented. So I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of being oriented in time, but if you don't have a lot of wealth, if you're kind of living day to day, you can become very present oriented, where you don't worry as much about the future because you don't know what the future is going to be, so you're more focused on right now. So if you're present oriented, right, well, you might not make appointments for the future, right? You might not worry about your health 20 years from now because, well, if you're living in poverty, you might not be alive 20 years from now anyway. So, there's not as much reason to worry about it. So just kind of understanding, and I've really come to like that idea, and sometimes it can explain really well why people, behave like as they do. Whereas having, a present orientation, thinking, hey, I might not be around very long, I need to make the best of things right now, versus maybe having a future orientation where you think, oh, I'm gonna wait, now, and I'm to make sure that later I, take care of this, this, and this. Whereas if you're poor and you're worried about the future, you might be just focused on right now, what can I do? African American English is a dialect of Standard American English. It is rule governed, it is systematic. So we're often going to see omission of the possessive on the noun. So instead of it's John's pencil, just it John pencil. Omission of to be forms, she is a nice lady, she a nice lady, right? So you're getting the exact same meaning across, and just a little bit shorter. Omission of past tense ending, he lived in California, he live in California. You'll often hear the word done combined with a past tense form to indicate action that took place in the distant past. So he fixed the stove, he done fixed the stove. The F can be substituted for TH, so teeth, nothing can turn into teeth, nothing, and a consonant cluster reduction. So often just leaving off, especially at the end of words, sort of that extra consonant. So left and wasp are going to turn into left and wasp. Again, just a little bit, maybe shorter, often getting the point across with a little bit less of the verb endings, to be forms, possession, and that a lot of people that speak a dialect, including African Americans, are going to often use code switching. So different linguistic styles for different situations. So somebody who's African American might speak a certain way at work, might speak a lot of Standard American English when they're at work, and come home and be really tired because they've been working really hard at that. And then they come home and they can just speak their sort of native African American English that they grew up with at home, which they're much more familiar with, right? It's very hard to kind of be able to code switch back and forth. It's not always easy. Hispanic cultural and linguistic variables. Again, we've got very strong family values. We're going to prize children, have a great respect of elders, loyal to all extended family members, a very relaxed attitude toward child rearing. So you're going to really prize children and really expect them that they're going to make the right decision, so that you don't have to hover over them, because they're prized and they're going to do the right thing. There's a lot of family interdependence, so that you're not going to do something without consulting your family members, making sure that it's going to be the right thing for many family members rather than just you. Respect for educational institutions and teachers. Remember I said I would talk about this more when we're talking about a little bit of the same thing with overall African American culture. A good friend of mine was a speech therapist in Brooklyn and worked at a school in Brooklyn with a big Hispanic American population. And he had, so a lot of his kids were Hispanic, just because that's what most of the kids in the school were. And it was not uncommon, that he would come in on a Monday and, the moms would have dropped off breads and homemade salsa and all these great things. And yet, which was really cool, and yet, he had a really hard time getting them to come into school for IEP meetings and meetings like that, because the idea was that he was the speech language pathologist. The teachers were the teachers. They were amazing. They were great and very well respected. So why, as the parent, would I have to come in? Like, this is your domain. You're the teacher. You're the expert. I respect you. So I'm going to work on what I can at home. And be a great mom, a great dad, right? But I'm not going to come in. So on the one hand, it was great because he felt valued and they were always happy with him and excited. But at the same time, it was hard to get them to come in and work together, because they really viewed that, hey, that's your domain. You take care of the school. I'll take care of home. Which was really interesting. Again, a great deal of warmth. Again, would bring in a lot of food, would give hugs, very, very cool interactions with his parents. Again, a lot of Hispanic kids are going to be more likely to live in poverty. So again, maybe present oriented. Just remembering that there might not be as much concern about the future, because the future is, you might not be living in the same place in the future. You might not be going to the same school in the future. So focusing on what's going on today, not worried about those future appointments. Hispanic teens are going to be twice as likely to drop out of school than national average. So just being aware of that is really important. Language differences observed in Spanish speakers. Again, often the adjective will be placed after the noun, because that's what always happens in the Spanish language. So the house green is big. Would not be unusual, and certainly not a sign of a language disorder. They're going to omit apostrophe s for plurals, possessives, and regular third person present tense. Again, just shortening things up. We have 5 plate here. The girl book is brown. The baby cry. The use of double negatives. I don't have no more. And the adverb placed directly after the verb. So he drives very fast his motorcycle. Again, all things that we're going to see in Spanish. So not a language disorder, right? Just something that they're bringing over from their native language. Asian cultural and linguistic variables. Central focus is on the family. Interdependence is encouraged. Again, you don't make decisions often without, feedback from the grandparents, from the whole family. View of disability can be related to karma and actions of persons or ancestors. So that can be difficult too. I got a great experience to go over to India for 2 weeks and meet a lot of people who stutter and talk to them about stuttering and give some presentations. And in certain religions, there was really the belief that you stuttered, or you were disabled because of, something that your ancestors had done. So like you were being punished from long ago. So kind of a hard thing to deal with. There was a lot of shame involved, and family not wanting to work on things, and just being aware of that's really important. Again, children are highly cherished, really important. Elders are really important. Um, Also, the idea, though, while children are cherished, that they should be quiet, so that when adults are speaking, they should be quiet. So, if we're giving a child from an Asian culture, an assessment or something, and they're not speaking, well, maybe they're quiet, maybe they have a language disorder, or maybe they're just being really respectful, and not talking very much like they're supposed to in their home or with their family. Humility and modesty is valued, so there's not going to be a lot of, um, outward pride and things like that. Group harmony over individual achievement, right? And that fits right in. So, what if you do something great that doesn't matter if it doesn't help, the group as a whole? Confrontation is avoided. As a health professional, that can sound good, but you can also have clients um, who are Asian Americans who maybe aren't very happy with the kind of therapy they're getting, don't feel like it's working, but you ask them how it's going, and they'll say, "Oh, this is great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this." When, and then you as a provider don't really know that things aren't going well, and that, you would make a change if you knew that at home this wasn't working. So that can be hard. The major religions are going to be Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. So just being aware of that, and not assuming anything as far as religion or anything else goes. Just some language differences. Again, omission of the possessive, that's a big one. Past tense, double marking. So we're going to have past tense twice. He didn't, went. Misordering of interrogatives. So how old you are, and omission or overgeneralization of articles. So he went the home, rather than just he went home. How should people be assessed and treated? So we'll just do a little bit of this. So second language acquisition and bilingualism, typical processes. You can have, so what's so hard about second language acquisition and bilingualism is that everyone is a little bit different. There are two main processes. One is going to be simultaneous bilingual acquisition. That's where two languages are acquired simultaneously from birth. So maybe, we were just talking about um, um, Asian languages. So maybe dad is from China, mom is from America. And so at home, mom speaks English and the dad speaks a dialect of Chinese. So the child's heard that growing up, and they've always just spoke both languages at the same time. And there's also sequential bilingual acquisition, or the first language is learned from birth and second language learned at later point. So if we have a child who, comes over from China, mom and dad are Chinese, and they're plopped right into an American school in kindergarten and first grade, they don't know English, right? So they've already learned Chinese, and then they've got to learn English after they've already started learning Chinese, and after maybe they're fluent in Chinese. All right, so you can have certain errors then, especially if we have that, that hierarchy where you've got sequential bilingual acquisition, where you learn one and then the other. So things that can happen is errors of transfer, where we're going to have errors in the second language are going to cause by influence of the first language. So again, if somebody is fluent in Spanish, right, they're going to use a lot of the grammar from Spanish in English, right, that might not always fit. They're also, if they're learning, they're going to go through a silent period. So again, you might have a child who's really shy and quiet. So if you have, a child who's Hispanic American who is just learning English for the first time in school, in kindergarten, right? They might be super quiet at first because they are trying to learn, they're trying to soak in as much English as they can, and so not talking at all. So they might be perfectly, average or above average language-wise, but they're going to come across as being super quiet while they're trying to learn English for the first time. And we'll even see some language loss in the first language um, when they start speaking and learning that second language. So they start getting proficient at the second language, not using the first language as much. They might have a little bit of loss short term in that initial primary language as they learn the secondary language. Usually over time, you're going to catch up, and actually learning two or more languages has, huge benefits over just knowing one language, but at first it might be more difficult. Um, so often English language learners, kids learning English for the first time, are going to be over-referred, right? They're going to have little knowledge of English when starting school. They're going to struggle in school because of that. And they also come from different environments and cultural backgrounds than the average, maybe US student. So maybe they'll be doing things that don't make sense, and they seem to be, struggling and having a hard time when, again, they're just learning English for the first time. So we've got to be part of that team as speech language pathologists to help determine whether is this a language disorder or is this a language difference. Okay. So we are finished with chapter 5, and again, we'll talk more about how to assess and how to treat students who are English language learners when we talk about assessment overall.